Welcome to our next lesson in Mesopotamia, Mesopotamian Politics. So there's a couple of words that you need to understand before we can continue. The first word is city-state. A city-state is a city and its surrounding farmlands with its own leaders and government. So when we talk about the Mesopotamian city-states, these are what we are referring to. 2, government. Government is a system that creates laws and makes decisions. Okay, so much like today we have a government, we have a president that helps to create laws, and then we have the House and we have the Senate, we have a governor, we have mayors, we have all types of different people who are part of our government that help create laws and make decisions. 3, a monarchy. A monarchy is a government in which one person has all the power and makes all the decisions. In a monarchy, a king or a queen rules. So this is much like Middle Ages, where you have a king or a queen that rules over everything. 4, authority. Authority is the right to command or influence. Again, if you need time to rewrite these words or to fully comprehend them, don't hesitate to pause and spend more time on the vocabulary. All right, so with a monarchy, there are certain advantages and disadvantages. Because you only have one person making decisions, you're able to make quick decisions, and there's no arguing. So it's quite nice that you have quick decision making and that there's nobody to argue with. However, there is also a lot of disadvantages. People have no freedoms or choices, so what the king says goes. And people do not share in the decision-making process. So a king can make a decision of what is good for him or his family or somebody else and not take into consideration how it might affect many others. So whereas today we have a democracy where there are lots of people who are involved in the decision making, and we actually get to decide who our president is. In a monarchy, that is not the case. The decision is made, there's no arguing, there's no discussion, it just is what it is. All right, so if we go back to Mesopotamia, during that time we had several different city-states. So we had the first city-state, which was Sumer, the first civilization. And you have Babylonia, Akkad, okay, these general areas. And each of these different spots right here, so Kish, Nippur, Lagash, these are each their own individual city-states. Now, during this time, Sargon of Akkad decided that he was going to put together a group of soldiers, and he started to take over all the different city-states. So they took over Babylon, Nippur, and not in this order, but he went with his army and took over all of the city-states. Once he had taken over and conquered each of the city-states, he created what was known as the Akkadian Empire. It is important to know that an empire is lands that are taken over. Okay, so these city-states were taken over and they're ruled by an emperor. So Sargon had his army take over, conquer all these lands, and he became the emperor of this area. So Sargon was the first ruler of Akkad and a very strong warrior. He attacked and conquered all of the city-states. Now, he didn't do this on his own. He did this with his own army. However, he was the leader in all of this. And he unified Mesopotamia into one empire and became the first Mesopotamian emperor. So before Sargon, they had their own individual city-states. But once Sargon had his army go and take over each of the city-states, they became one empire and they were all ruled by Sargon. Okay, an empire is a group of conquered lands and it is ruled by an emperor. Again, if you need more time, hit pause. Make sure you get everything written down. Right, so after Sargon's time of rule, after he passed away, his son took over. And when his son took over, there was just chaos. Nobody really listened. There were no rules, no laws. So at this time, Hammurabi of Babylonia took over, and he was the ruler of Babylonia. He took over the empire after Sargon's son lost control. And he created the first set of written laws called the Code of Hammurabi. Now, he took over after Sargon's son lost control because at this point there was just chaos. Nobody was listening to anything because there was such a lack of leadership. Each city-state was making its own decisions and doing whatever it wanted to do, and within the city-states, nobody was listening to anybody else. There was just what I wanted to do is what I'm going to do, and so there was nothing but chaos. So the Code of Hammurabi, by definition, is the first written laws, and it followed the idea of equal justice. Equal justice was fair treatment under the law. So this saying, eye for an eye, was what equal justice really focused on. So they took it actually very much so to the letter of an eye for an eye. The purpose was to stop chaos and violence, and it resulted in order and justice. So Hammurabi took over and created this set of laws for everybody. But once again, because he was the emperor, he got to do what he wanted to do. There was nobody else involved in the decision making, so these laws that he wrote, which are actually what we've based our laws on, and now they're not as exact as these are. However, it's the idea of these laws that we follow to make our laws today. So a lot of what you're going to see here, you'll notice has a little bit of connection to today's laws. All right, so Hammurabi's Code of Laws. So what should happen to a boy who slaps his father? So if you slapped your father, the consequence was, if a son strikes his father, they shall cut off his hand. So this idea of equal justice, if you slap your father, your hand gets chopped off so you no longer can do so. And what should be done about a wife who does not cook for her husband and gossips about him? If the woman has neglected her wifely duties and has belittled her husband, they shall throw that woman into the water so she will drown. Right? So the idea here was that you had to show respect and that you had to follow the law, otherwise there were severe consequences. What happens if a man is unable to pay his debts? If a man be in debt and is unable to pay his creditors, he shall sell his wife, son, or daughter, or bind them over to service. So if your father or husband could not pay his debt, you could be sold over to become a slave, or you could be sold to somebody else as their now property. So I know a lot of you are probably thinking right now, these are ridiculous. This would never fly today. Like I said before, these are not our exact laws, but you can see where the idea of if this happens, this is the consequence is still found in our laws today. So this is the very, very first written law. It might be a little rough, however, this is what they lived by, and this was meant to create order out of chaos. And I would think that if you had the potential of getting your hand chopped off for slapping somebody, it probably stopped other people from slapping people. All right, taxation. So now along with becoming an empire and having these written laws and having a government, you have taxation. Taxation is money or goods collected by the government. All right, so time to do some thinking. What do you think the American government uses tax money for? So I want you to take a minute, pause, and think about what you think your tax money goes towards. So now in this case, your parents pay taxes. What do you think that money goes for? When you come back, we'll talk about your answers. All right. Tax money goes towards public structures, so parks that you go to, public libraries, schools, all those types of things. That's what tax money goes towards. It goes towards government buildings, police, fire station. It goes towards all of those types of things that are public services or public structures. So an advantage of taxation is it allows us to build nice things and keep up nice parks and have working police forces and firefighting forces and such. However, the disadvantage is the government can abuse the power and take too much money from people. Now, at this point in life, we do have a sort of checks and balances where there's a lot of that has to happen before we can raise taxes. However, you have to remember back in ancient Mesopotamia, they didn't have this. It was one ruler decides, and you did not disobey anybody who was of a higher social class than you were. So if the king or the emperor said, you owe $100 for tax every week, you owed $100 for tax every week. There was no telling them no, there was no getting around it. So they could really abuse their power and collect money and then say they were using it, but not use it for the greater good. They could use it to build themselves a nice castle or a nice home and not put it back into the city-state or into their city. All right, so at this point, what I would like you to do is you have a couple of questions on Edmodo, and I'd like you to finish those questions. They're in your workbook, answer them in your workbook, and then answer them on Edmodo. And when you come back to class tomorrow, we are going to talk about the Code of Hammurabi, and we are going to discuss where we see it today and how this helped ancient Mesopotamia form. If you have any questions, be sure to post them to Edmodo so we can go over them in class tomorrow.